What's up, EFD squad? How's it going? Today we've got 10 moments that could have changed football. What are they, I hear you ask? Well, you're about to find out. 10. Mourinho Part 1. No club could seem less suited to Jose Mourinho than Barcelona, but the Portuguese almost ended up as Blaugrana manager back in 2008. Barcelona had won the Champions League 2 years earlier, their first in 14 years, but had lost out on the following 2 league titles, coming third in 2007-08, a huge 10 points behind Villarreal. New blood was needed, and it was thought Mourinho could provide it. The special one had been out of work for 8 months after being sacked by Chelsea, but he still had a Champions League and 4 league titles on his CV, and more importantly, was considered to have the fabled Barca DNA. Mourinho had spent 4 years at the club as a coach, first acting as a translator for Bobby Robson, then assistant to Louis van Gaal, who put him in charge of Barcelona B. So he jumped at the chance to coach the Catalan Giants, giving a 27-slide PowerPoint presentation in which he outlined his vision for the club. However, Johan Cruyff favoured the other candidate for the job, Pep Guardiola, who had completed just 1 season as coach of Barca B, and club officials were concerned that Mourinho would antagonise the press. Despite Guardiola being aged just 37, they opted to hire him, the first Spaniard to manage the club in 6 years, and football divided into offensive and defensive, Barca and Real Madrid, Pep and Jose. 9. Gerrard's slip. We all know the story by now. After an 11-game winning run, the Reds lost at Anfield thanks to a poorly timed slip from skipper Steven Gerrard, which saw Demba Ba race through and score unopposed. Chelsea added a second late on, and Man City went ahead of Liverpool on goal difference, closing out their second title in 3 years. That result saw Gerrard depart Anfield without a Premier League title, making his final appearance in a 6-1 battering at the hands of Stoke. But the ripple effects spread across European football. Brendan Rodgers was sacked just 18 months after the slip, but would surely have kept his job if he had delivered a First League triumph in 24 years. If he had remained at Anfield, Jurgen Klopp would probably have joined Chelsea, who sacked Jose Mourinho for the second time just 2 months after Rodgers was given the sack, and were rumoured to be after the German. Celtic would never have been able to hire Rodgers and would not have gone unbeaten in 2016-17, while Liverpool might have still had Suarez, Sterling and Coutinho leading the line. 8. United win the 1990 FA Cup. The 1990 FA Cup final was a tense occasion. Crystal Palace and Man United faced each other, with the Eagles competing for their first major trophy in their history, while United were without any silverware in 5 years, with Alex Ferguson having nothing to show for his 4 seasons in charge of the Red Devils. Fergie was under serious pressure. United had gone 8 games without a win in the league and dropped as low as 17th in January. They would go on to finish 13th, 5 points above the relegation zone, but a 5-1 loss to Man City saw the Daily Express argue that Ferguson had the worst record of any United manager of modern times. And after offloading stars like Gordon Strachan, Norman Whiteside and Paul McGrath, the Glaswegian needed a big result to save his job. The final finished 3-3, which in those days meant a replay, and United prevailed 1-0 at the second attempt. That success gave them entry into the 1991 European Cup Winners' Cup, where they beat Johan Cruyff's Barcelona to earn yet another trophy, and they followed that up with victory in the Super Cup and League Cup. 3 years after Fergie's miraculous escape, United won the title, their first since 1967, and the Scot became an icon. 7. Armenia versus Turkey. The history of the relationship between Armenia and Turkey is one of hatred and racial discord. In the early years of the 20th century, 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Ottoman Empire, and the two nations have long disagreed about whether the deaths constitute a genocide. As a result, the border between them remained closed once Armenia became independent from the Soviet Union. But FIFA put the two on a collision course in 2008, drawing the teams together in the qualifying rounds for the 2010 World Cup. That could have produced a resurgence of ethnic violence and nationalism had it not been for Serj Sargsyan, the Armenian president, who invited then Turkish President Abdullah Gül to attend the match as his guest. Gül became the first Turkish leader to visit Armenia, along with 5,000 travelling fans, and saw the team triumph 2-0. Though extremists on both sides accused the politicians of betraying the national interest, the move led to an accord between the countries the following year and a partial thaw in relations. Not bad for one football match. 6. India missed the World Cup. The world's second largest nation at 1.3 billion people, India has never got to a World Cup. They've also only qualified for the Asian Cup on 3 occasions, with their 2011 appearance their only trip to a major tournament in the last 30 years. But the history of their national team could have been very different. In 1950, the World Cup was set to start again after 12 years away, having been suspended during and after the Second World War. India faced Burma, the Philippines and Indonesia in qualification, but all 3 nations withdrew, giving the Blue Tigers an automatic place at the tournament. However, the Indian FA decided against attending the competition, considering the 1952 Olympics a bigger prize, and because FIFA refused to let the team play barefoot. FIFA offered to pay some of India's travel costs to ensure their attendance, but the decision was made. It was, of course, a huge mistake. Out of spite, FIFA blocked them from qualification for the following edition, and they have never come close to qualifying since. And if they had gone in 1950, they might well have raised the profile of football in the country, with visionary coach Saeed Abdul Rahim at the helm, who took India to the semi-finals at the 1956 Olympics and won the Asian Games twice. 5. Abramovich buying Tottenham. Roman Abramovich had a couple of £100 million burning a hole in his pocket back in 2003. The Russian had considered buying a club in his homeland, but knew that he would never conquer Europe that way, and so turned his attentions to the Premier League, but not Chelsea. Abramovich was more interested in Tottenham, but Daniel Levy, the chief executive, quoted him a price of £150 million, exorbitant given that the stock exchange valued Spurs at just £20 million at the time. Abramovich then sought the advice of then England manager Sven-Goran, who suggested that he take a look at Chelsea. With Lampard, Terry and Gudjohnsen among others, the squad didn't need a total overhaul, and they were in almost £100 million worth of debt, meaning they'd be likely to sell. Abramovich eventually paid around £60 million for control of the club, and gave the Blues financial resources to rival Europe's best. If he'd bought Spurs instead, then they would have received nearly £2 billion in transfer funding, been coached by Jose Mourinho, and might well have lifted a Champions League themselves, while Chelsea's last title would be the one they picked up way back in 1955. 4. Cruyff, 1978. 3 times World Cup finalists, the Netherlands have long been one of world football's major players, but they might have broken their trophy duck early on if Johan Cruyff had attended the 1978 World Cup. 4 years earlier, the Armenia had made the final against West Germany, where their carousel style of fluid offensive play and high pressing represented an evolutionary leap for football tactics, before being shut down by an organised and determined rearguard action from the Germans. So by 1978, optimism was high in the Netherlands, with the squad so strong that they could afford to leave striker Kees Kist at home, a forward who had bagged 35 goals that year and would be the first Dutch winner of the Golden Boots the following season. But Cruyff, fearful after a kidnap attempt on his family, stayed at home while other vital players refused to travel to Argentina, then ruled by right-wing dictator Jorge Videla. The squad was still more than good enough to reach the final, but against the home nation, they crumbled, losing 3-1 after extra time. If Cruyff, 3 times a Ballon d'Or winner, had gone to the tournament, surely the Dutch would have had enough to overcome Argentina and change the history of 2 football nations. 3. Wenger for Real. In 2009, as they so often are, Real Madrid were looking for a new manager. Bernd Schuster had just been sacked despite winning the title the previous year, while Juan de Ramos, formerly of Tottenham, had taken the club to second place, but still 9 points off Barcelona, who had won the Champions League for the second time in 4 campaigns. Real, meanwhile, had exited at the round of 16 5 years in a row, and they decided to bring in Arsene Wenger, who had just taken the Gunners to the semis again. Wenger hadn't won a trophy since the 2005 FA Cup, but Los Blancos were convinced that he would build an exciting, dynamic young side at the Bernabeu. And Wenger himself was interested, but worried that he would be saddled with an ill-thought-out Galactico policy asking club officials, are you going to Hollywood again, or are you going to make a football team? Real offered the Frenchman £6 million a year and told him that they would pursue Cristiano Ronaldo. But with Henri, Gilberto Silva and Jens Lehmann all recently having left the Emirates, Wenger felt obliged to stay and oversee the rebuild. Manuel Pellegrini came in instead, but lasted for a single trophyless year, before Mourinho arrived and the Merengues embarked on another era of dominance. Arsenal meanwhile continued to deteriorate, taking another 5 years to lift silverware again, while their coach, once a visionary, became a dinosaur. 2. Das Reboot. If there's one word on a fixture list to make your heart sink, it's Germany. The German national team has appeared at every World Cup since 1954 and have not lost an away game in qualification for the tournament ever. That's an 83-year stretch. But as recently as 2000, Die Mannschaft had some serious difficulties. The Germans finished top of their qualifying group for Euro 2000 and were drawn with Portugal, England and Romania in the first round. With Oliver Kahn, Michael Ballack, Lothar Matthäus and Oliver Bierhoff in the squad, the Germans were expected to advance comfortably, but they could only draw with Romania before suffering a 1-0 loss to England. In the last game of the group, Germany lost 3-0 to Portugal, while Romania beat England, and both football giants headed home. That disaster, coupled with a 5-1 loss to the Three Lions a year later, saw the German Football Federation revolutionise their coaching and talent development. Bundesliga clubs were forced to set up academies to produce young talent, and after a decade, over 50% of the players in the division were homegrown. Germany made the semi-finals of 7 of the next 8 major tournaments, and in 2014 became Weltmeister for the first time since 1990. 1. Mourinho Part 2. No one wants to admit it, but a lot of football is down to luck. A strange bounce can make one set of players world champions, while others are forgotten. And Jose Mourinho might never have become a superstar, well, at least not at Chelsea, if he hadn't had a huge stroke of luck in the 2004 Champions League round of 16. After coming in second to Real Madrid in the group stage, Porto were handed a nightmare tie, Man United in the second round. But in classic Mourinho style, the Dragons edged United 2-1 in Portugal and went to Old Trafford with a great shot at advancing. However, the dream looked over in the first half. Paul Scholes put Ferguson's side 1-0 up with a header on the half hour, and as the clock ticked towards the interval, struck a second. However, the linesman's flag went up and the score was rolled back to 1-0, a decision which every fan at home could see was plainly wrong. Porto had been given a reprieve, but was still heading out on away goals, until the dying seconds. Benny McCarthy sent in a free kick in the 90th minute, but Tim Howard could only palm it out, allowing Costinha to smash it in from close range. Porto then faced Lyon, Deportivo and Monaco on the way to the trophy, and as a newly minted champion of Europe, Mourinho was deemed the perfect man to spearhead Chelsea's assault on the Premier League. The rest is history. So those were our top 10 moments that could have changed the course of football history. But were there any we missed out? What did you think? Let us know, as always, in the comments below. Now, if you enjoyed this, why not head over to Football Mundial with myself and Z Money? And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.